Rock climbing. When I was a sophomore in high school, my friends and I used to go to a famous rock climbing practice near Hano in Saitama Prefecture. It was basically private property, but I think it was already open in the 1960s because of its solid rock quality, ability to practice population climbing, and proximity to the Tokyo metropolitan area. I am amazed at how people used to climb with inadequate safety equipment in the old days. Rock climbing is basically a two-person team game, with one person climbing and the other operating the rope in case of a fall. At that time, it was so popular that on holidays, there was a waiting list to climb the rock, but when it rained, not many people would come. It was raining that day, but we were still young at the time, so we headed for the crag in the autumn rain with the intention of climbing a stream today. A 10-minute walk from the station leads to the entrance of that rocky area. At the entrance of the narrow mountain path, a small red shrine was erected, which was a landmark. It was a 10-minute walk again along the mountain path, but it was dark and gloomy on that day, and the trees seemed to be weighed down by the heavy weight of the sun. The bamboo grass under my feet usually made a light rustling sound, but it was quiet that day, and I was somewhat uncomfortable because it was foggy from the middle of the day. I am not afraid to walk on a mountain path in the dark before dawn, but the heaviness of the day was different from usual and, to be honest, it was creepy. Perhaps the heat and humidity of the long rainy season also helped. The crag is divided into two main parts. One is the one that is often the subject of sport climbing. The other is the rock that is the stage for rock climbing, which has been done for a long time, and is a rather small rock about a little over 20 meters high. When we arrived, as expected, no one was there, so we both said to each other, as expected, no one is coming today. We were both happy and said, no one is coming today, as expected. We were happy that we could go up without waiting. Generally, routes that are a bit difficult to climb are limited in the places to place fingers and feet, and I suspect that at this old crag, the spots to place fingers are polished smooth and become more difficult every year, but we wondered what it would be like to climb that route on a rainy day. That was my main goal in solving it. We decided to use a rope like a pickaxe first going around the back side of the rock and bringing the rope to the top, then using it as a fulcrum, dropping the ends down, and tying the two ends to each person's waist, dividing the climber and the fall arrestor. This was a safer way to climb, but when I first started climbing, one of my regulars told me that if the fulcrum of the rope was placed in the wrong way, it could break due to friction with the rock when falling, and that such accidents had happened in the past. The route was sold on the fact that it was about halfway up, about as long as you are tall and warped -45 degrees, and once you got past that, the slope was about 80 degrees, not too difficult, but the altitude was reasonable, so I was going to try to climb to the top anyway. At first, my partner was climbing, but his fingers seemed to slip on the bends, and he kept falling down and climbing back up again and again. I was wearing rain separates, of course, but as I waited for him, I couldn't help but be concerned about the dampness of the rain, so once he came down, I took a sheet out of my pack and tied it to the trees around us to protect us from the rain. The rain shelter was very good, but it was not very nice from a safety standpoint, as you could just about lose sight of the top of the crag when you were under it. However, as it often happens, I could call out to my climbing partner or use the rope to see what was going on, so I didn't change my seat position. But it was so foggy on such a low mountain that day that I couldn't tell if it was rain or mist particles. I was determined to keep looking up and never give up, because when you fall, you usually think, oh no, I'm not going to make it. As I approached the spot in question, I first put my right hand on the clue, then placed my left hand next to it and lifted myself up. In this position, my feet were also in the bending part of the rock, which was very unstable unless my feet were in proper contact with the rock. I then glanced at the slight peak of the summit, trying to steady myself and thinking about my next move. Then, from my line of sight, a person wearing red separates suddenly appeared from the top of the mountain. I thought it was someone who had come down from the mountain path above, and was peeking at the upper fulcrum out of curiosity, and managed to glare at him as if to say, "What a long-suffering old man in this time of emergency." I managed to clear the area with a glare at him. I put my hand on the end of the warped part and was suspended in midair, but all I had to do was cause my body to go up, so the moment I held that part with both hands, I looked back down, as if to say to my friend below, "I've climbed." Unfortunately, he could not see where he had climbed up because the sheet was in the way, and the rope was just silently sent to him. A little disappointed, I peeled back up to the top again, and after touching the fulcrum at the top, I shouted, "Let's go down," and put tension on the rope to descend to the bottom. The person I saw earlier was already gone when I went up there, but I didn't hear any footsteps at all with the sound of the rain, and being a passerby, I didn't care at that time and didn't even pretend to tell my friends a story. We changed routes several times and rested under the sheet for a while, but around 6 o'clock, I noticed that it was starting to get dark, so I said, "Let's go." We decided to go up from the back of the mountain to remove the support point at the top while I went down to put away the sheet and my partner climbed up from the back. We could have climbed up from the side of the rock, but the exposed soil and rock surface was very slippery due to the rain, and it was too much trouble for me, so I let my partner do it. He was good at climbing in such places, so he usually took care of it. I quickly put away the sheet, smoked a cigarette, and took a break. I was killing time, watching the occasional raindrops fall on my cigarette, but it was only for a minute or so. Suddenly I became curious about the route I had first climbed and began to look up to see how to climb it again. The way up was almost limited, but there must be some kind of trick to it, and the more I thought about it, the more I became stuck. As I was looking at the last move of the warp part, I suddenly saw my partner's face and thought, "Oh, he has arrived," and said, "You can drop the rope." But what was he thinking? He kept staring at my face and did not drop the rope. For a moment, I thought, "What?" But I was defeated by the look in his eyes, and I couldn't look away from his face, so we were both silent for a while. He suddenly turned his head and went over the top. "What is it?" But I was getting tired, so I just waited for the rope to drop. Shortly after that, I heard a voice from above say, "Drop the rope." I said, "Okay," thinking I had finally made it. As I was gathering up the fallen rope, my partner came sliding down, jingling the metal fittings. It seemed that he was having a hard time on the slippery back road. I asked him as soon as he came down, "Why were you staring down there earlier?" He said, "What?" He said, "What?" He said that he had been stuck on the slope for a long time and had not been able to go up for quite a long time. I was confused for a moment and was about to say, "Well, you were looking at that hang," when I suddenly remembered the shock of being hit in the head with a gun barrel. I was about to say, "You were looking at the hang," when suddenly I felt a shock as if I had been hit on the head with a sledgehammer. Because the separates worn by the person I was peering down at were red and those of my partner in front of me were blue. I panicked for a moment and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought it might have been another climber, but that was also impossible because my partner dropped the rope really shortly after the person disappeared from sight. The colors were generally the same as the ones I had seen when I first climbed up. And then there was the blank, emotionless look in their eyes. Although I could not see their expressions clearly when I looked at them from below, I will never forget the way they looked at me. In the end, we never found out what that person was. As you probably know, this kind of talk is common in the mountains, so I didn't bother to tell the regulars there, nor did I tell my partner, but only mentioned it to my friends when we had a drink from time to time. Unfortunately, 11 years have passed since then, and my partner passed away in the mountains. It was not the first time for me to lose a friend, but I was able to sublimate my feelings if he was scattered in the mountains. I feel sorry for his family, though. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.